of all, and as Lucas said before, we're gonna be here for quite a while. So if there's something you're in a hurry, something you want to do, and you're just waiting for this to finish, either don't wait or know that you're probably not gonna finish this, because I'm expecting this to go over 2 hours. So maybe not, but maybe. Yes, because this is like my third presentation in this Discord. It's the third presentation I do about Thracia 776. So it's kind of like, luckily it will be the last, probably. I don't promise anything, but probably it will. And apart from that, I will ask certain level of participation of you, especially in one specific part. But if you want to intervene, of course, don't feel pressured about the language. You can speak English, Spanish, Catalan. Outside of that, I'm not very fluent, but we can try to do something. I think it will be necessary, though. So whenever you want to speak, do it, however, in whatever language you want, because I rather have a lot of participation in other languages than to keep this in English, which is more just to get used to it. So okay, first question. This is not really very important. Is there anyone who hasn't played Fire Emblem? And I'm literally just gonna go Discord like.
I'm gonna be intervening all the time, so it's fine. I haven't played Fire Emblem. Well, I actually played like the 1 hour of of one game, which I don't remember which, because I needed to do an analysis for a project in my university. But yeah, I have played a tiny bit of it, but not of the full game. Just the tutorial and some initial missions to get some screenshots, basically, of the UI.
Anyone else who hasn't played it?
¿El gacha cuenta?
No. Well,
creo, José, que el gacha es a lo que nos referimos todos cuando decimos que hemos jugado Fire Emblem.
Actually, kinda. It kind of counts. So I'm gonna give it to you.
Okay. Vale.
Anyone else who hasn't played Fire Emblem?
I haven't played it too.
Okay, good. So there's quite a bit of news here. Good. Then I'm just kind of gonna go slower here to introduce the basics. You have an army of units, and each unit has a bunch of stats. This is basically a tactical RPG. So if you have played an RPG, it's like a real action game, but by turns. So kind of like mixing those two together. Basically, every unit has HP, attack, defense, which are like basics. Then you have speed, you have skill, luck, constitution. And then we have movement, which is kind of more an external variable. Basically, you have a map, which is a grid, and you have the movement value. Depending on your movement value, you can move a certain amount of tiles. And what you have to do is basically reach an enemy and attack it, or be attacked by it. The objective is usually killing all the enemies. It's not necessarily that, but it helps on the completion of maps. So basically, these are like the two big things I want you to remember. You move on a map and you attack enemies. Right, so kind of the way we translate that in, like, if you want to be pristine, the terminology of this presentation, but it's going to be the short, mid, long term. The short term is basically attacking. The mid term is basically doing the map. And the long term is going to be completing the game. It's basically the progress from the first map to the last map. And kind of the core game loop and the thing that we're going to look the most, and where kind of the meat and potatoes of the situation is in the short and the midterm. Because basically what the player does constantly is you enter a map, or you arrive at the map, whatever, and then you attack an enemy, you go back to the map, you attack the next enemy, etc. So since it's the core game loop, I think it's the part more important and more interesting to analyze.
Question?
Yep.
I'm asking this question mainly because of the people that have said that they haven't played Fire Emblem. In the short-term loop, you specify try not to get killed in the process. Would you care to explain why is this such?
Yeah.
Why this is especially important in Fire Emblem?
Absolutely. Right. It's kind of like the main staples of the series. In this game, if you get killed, you stay dead. Unless you're the protagonist, in which case, the game kind of has to restart the map. But any other unit that dies stays dead. It's called permadeath, and basically is kind of what we're gonna see later. What puts a big emphasis on these kind of games and what the decisions that you're gonna have to take mean. But thank you for pointing that out, because it's kind of important, and there's a
No
lot of
problem.
things I want to talk about, and I just keep forgetting. God dang it. Okay, so starting directly to the short term. We already kind of talked about this. This is gonna look very complicated. I'm just gonna ask you listen to my voice, and everything's gonna be fine, because it seems like a lot of bullshit, but it's not. So basically, we assume that there's an offensive unit, and that's A, and that can be the player or the enemy. And then we have the receiving unit, which is B, which can be, again, the enemy or the player. And so basically, we can kind of divide how the short term functions into different attacks. If you remember in the GIF, the enemy kind of attacked one of the units, and then the unit kind of countered. Each one of those interactions is a round. In every attack, you have various rounds. And basically, the way these functions is the attacking unit starts their round, and then if B is killed, end of battle. If it's not, the program checks if the B unit can counter. If they can counter, well, they attack, obviously. If A dies, then end of the battle. And if A doesn't, or the enemy couldn't counter, the computer again has to check if if either one can attack again. And if they can attack again, they attack again, obviously, and if they can't, end of the battle. So basically, is the kind of important things here is, can they double attack, and can they counter? And within each round, we have another bunch of calculations, which, like, we're not really gonna go on those, but basically you're checking, are you connecting your attack? Are you hitting the opponent? If you don't, next round. If you do, you have to make kind of a weird compromission of, like, is this your first or second attack? Because the numbers that you're taking into consideration are different, but whatever. And then you calculate based on if you are attacking physically or using magic, and then you consider skills, which are extremely varied. I don't want to talk about it right now, and then you attack. So
Oh, wait. One question.
Yeah,
So
sure.
all of these big scheme that we are seeing here, is it like I understand that when you said, like, when you talk about the GIF, it's like the GIF where they are like fighting. This is the algorithm or the flow chart that defines how
Okay.
does that go down. But does the player have interaction with this?
Really good question. We're gonna go into that, but I spoiled the answer. No, the player doesn't do shit here. This is all CPU.
Okay.
Basically, whatever, more letters, we don't care. What the player does care about is what is the damage that's being dealt, if the attack hits or doesn't hit, if it's a critical attack, because it does, I think it's 1.5 more damage, and if there's a double attack or a counter attack, whatever you want to call it. So basically, if we go back to our draft of, like, short, mid, long term, we can see that there's no decision really on the short term. Everything is the program running numbers. You're just seeing animations. As you can imagine, if you were just playing a game that is animations, not a lot of fun, right? So we're kind of being pushed to check what's in the midterm and the long term. However, I think there are some things that can be concluded from this. So we're kind of gonna go from there. This guy, you're gonna see him a lot. He's Augustus. He's a character from the game. He's like your advisor. So kind of why I put him here. He's a really cool guy. And basically, every time that we're reaching this point, I'm gonna kind of explain my conclusions on the topic and then give you some time to discuss. So basically, as I said, there's no player decisions, but there are design decisions. And it's interesting because those four factors that we talked about, damage, hit, critical, and double attack, are the different ways in which we can deal damage. It's, quote unquote, the different strategies that we have to approach combat. And I discarded hit. Whoa, that was a good one. I discarded hit because technically it's not a strategy, it's more of a requirement. If you don't hit the enemy, you can't win. It's kind of how it goes. But besides that, all others are different strategies that are very differentiated. And what is interesting is the way they are balanced. The more unlikely a situation is to occur, the less punishing it is. For example, high damage. It's weird to be able to one-shot an enemy, so there's not really anything bad within it. Like, you just do it. But because it's so rare, it's not going to be much of an influence to the game. Using critical attacks is somewhat inconsistent because it's tied to random number generation, but it's quite powerful. So it's kind of the balanced situation. But again, this being a strategy game, and of course having permadeath, it becomes a risky tool to use. On the other hand, damaging with double attacks is extremely easy. Most units are capable of these in a normal run, but because it's so easy to achieve, it also means that there's a certain drawback, which is the enemy can counterattack you. And then there's like a small subloop here, which is the game is not so much if you're doubling or not, it's about doubling without taking that counterattack, which means implications in positioning on how you advance the flow of the player going into combat. But not really gonna delve too much into it right now. Something really cool, haven't talked about. It's not very important, but there's this number that is the PCC, the Pursuit Critical Coefficient. It has a weird name, so we just use PCC. This basically is a multiplier on your critical hit. So basically, it makes critical hits more frequent, but it only occurs on the second hit. And the player has no idea this exists. This is never stated in the game. So basically, the designers thought of a way to make the game easier and they never told the player this. Because if they did, they would be creating a dominant strategy. Using units with high PCC and using critical weapons would become the best way, objectively, to beat the game. So they hid it to avoid that. And why would they avoid that? Well, we're going to talk about this later, but basically it's because we want this diversity in playstyles. The idea is that the player has to feel comfortable playing the game. To be able to present a good experience to the player, we need them to be comfortable. And the best way to do that, at least for the tools that gameplay has, or at least one of the tools that gameplay has, is by giving them options that they feel the closest with. If we offer them a lot of gameplay options, we're making them more comfortable with the game. A clear example that I think does it not so good is Pokemon. And like, I love the franchise, but kind of the problem with Pokemon combat, and I'm talking about the adventure one, not the competitive one, is the combat is just use super effective moves. The moment in which you have learned the type table, you kind of won the game. Like, leaving aside the fact that there's an amazing balance about you're going 10 levels over any enemy that you face on the game, but like, leaving that aside, just the fact that the game is based on use the most powerful move that has the best effectiveness kind of makes it a bit dull. And that's in absolute contrast to the manga of Pokemon, in which basically each battle is taking into consideration the specifics of each Pokemon, of like what they are supposed to be able to do. And it has a bit of bullshit, I'm going to be honest. Like, sometimes the manga just pulls out things that doesn't make a lot of sense. And of course, if you're trying to adapt that into a video game, you're going to kind of have to make it a systemized circle. Like, you cannot just start doing crazy things like, well, this Pokemon just suddenly can, in this very specific place, do this very specific thing, because it would basically break not only the programmers, but also any mental scheme that the player may have about how this game is played. But having this diversity and allowing for this differentiation on how you approach problems is a really good way to integrate the player in the story of your game, or not necessarily the explicit narrative that's being told, but literally whatever is happening could be considered a story. And well, lastly, about this RNG thing, I have a big problem with games whose main mechanic is just randomness. RNG should be used as a generator of problems. And we're going to talk about this later. But basically, I think that RNG is a way to, oh, well, whatever. Yeah, sure. Sorry, some people just entered. RNG should be a way to like create differentiation in the game, but not create the problem that the player has to face. So now, if anyone has any questions about the short term or about any of these conclusions, I would greatly appreciate.
Yeah,
Um,
in fact. Go ahead, please.
Yeah. Okay. So about the short term specifically, I thought that you would. I mean, you said before that the short term loop does not have any decisions whatsoever. But I mean, since from the scheme I saw, I also interpret that the short term is actually like loop is actually like the combats, right? The actual um like or not, because the midterm was the decisions made um depending on the changes on the map. By the map, do you mean like the world map or like the combat map?
Yeah, Fire Emblem doesn't have a world map. Everything is basically the structure is they tell you a piece of the story, and then you are in a map, and you have to do combat in the map. We consider the midterm as literally anything that happens on the world map, and the short term is literally just what happens within the attack. The short term is literally
Okay.
just the
Okay.
animations.
Okay. So okay. Now I understand. Okay, I thought differently by from when I saw the gifts or something, and from the experience, the brief experience that I had playing the game. But so I have my like questions. Like you talked about the PCC being a dominant strategy and how the developers hide it from the players, and I don't really understand which is the point on making it sounded like you thought it was something interesting that the game did, but I don't think it's I don't understand why is it interesting if basically what you're doing is giving the player a tool but hiding it. Like
Yeah.
with what sense does it make to implement something in the game that the player doesn't know about and will not use because there is no information about it unless you go into a dark web page where people are
Yes.
talking about Fire Emblem?
Okay, so we're gonna kind of talk about it later. Oh, wait a moment. We're gonna talk about it later, but basically, you have to know kind of what the designers were trying to do, and kind of like what Shozo Kaga, which is the creator of the series, tried to do with Fire Emblem, was to simulate what being in a war is like what, and very specifically with this game, what being a leader in a country that's in war is like. So basically, you can imagine that scenario and then think of a player that's just YOLO and just gonna create every enemy, and like it kind of creates a ludonarrative dissonance, if you know what I mean.
Of course, yeah. That's exactly what I mean.
Exactly.
If you don't
So
want it to happen, why just not put it in the game? If you're gonna hide it, why just? I mean, it's like, is it like, yeah, well, we put it because put an easy mode or
no,
put a
because
mode that it's just
in this way, what you're doing is basically you're conditioning the player to use double attacks. You're conditioning the player to use the safest strategy, but also the one that's going to make them think the most.
Um,
Is a hidden way to tell them that they should strategize and that they should think and plan what they are doing. And this reflects perfectly because the PCC, as I explained, I think I've explained, I'm not sure right now, the PCC basically only comes into the second round. It only affects, it's basically this thing okay, this thing here that I said, okay, we have first attack, second attack. This multiplier only occurs in the second attack. So basically, by this, the player kind of unconsciously gets that attacking 2 times is kind of the optimal strategy, even though it's not really optimal per se. It's a way for as I said, for the designers to condition players, but without having because you're not explicitly telling them what is going on. They can still choose what to play however they want.
so it's like so they feel better if they choose this strategy of attacking 2 times, so that they realize that somehow this strategy is the one that they are supposed to be using because this is how the game plays better?
Not quite. It's more of a like the player never knows about this. The player just kind of goes their way. Like the player will play however they want, but by implementing this mechanic, the designers are trying to orientate the player towards using the doubling attack system. But the player is never conscious of it. The player can only guess that, hey, when I attack 2 times, I crit more. But kind of logic what's telling you is like, well, because I attack more, it's only logic that I crit more because I have more chances, because I'm attacking more. So it's like a very nebulous, like what fascinates me about this mechanic is just how unspecific it is. Like it's not trying to achieve anything big. It's not any huge deal about the game, but it's a clear sign of the intention that the designers had to have you use the second attack, to take that risk of being counterattacked and having to plan to avoid that.
Okay, I think I understand now, but still, I'm not convinced that this is a good way of doing so. I don't think it's. I think it's well, maybe it's something Japanese, and I don't understand because of that. But like, why would you? I mean, there's other ways. There's more obvious ways of like making people go for a strategy than not implementing some PCC number that is gonna multiply somehow the attack. But I'm gonna leave someone else speak because I don't wanna stop the discussion like any longer either. I agree, however, and I agree and I like, however, the balance or how you put the different strategies and talked about the balance that they have, like increased reward or how safe it is and how rewarding is. I don't know to explain how basically, but the balance there is in the different strategies and how they are different one from each other.
Okay. Kind of like before we go to any other question, kind of like what I'm trying to get to is you want the players to play however they want, but as a designer, you also want to have them play the way you want them to play. So the PCC is kind of like the balance of not pushing the player in this very the first route, the most effective way to play the game, but also kind of respecting how you want them to play. It's weird because it kind of tries to balance 2 things that are complete opposites, basically.
Yeah, it's definitely no. It's interesting. I mean, that's an interesting concept. What you're talking about, and it's true. Like sometimes you want to give your players decisions, but you also want them to play the game a certain way, but give them the choices. And this is interesting. I just don't think, or I just don't see how the PCC is an optimal way of doing it. But I like that you bring this topic up because it's something real.
Okay, then. Any other intervention about this?
Quería hacer una intervención rápida.
Yep.
Lucas, has comentado de si el jugador no lo ve, ¿por qué ponerlo en el juego? Bueno, estoy parafraseando un poco. Es muy común, por ejemplo, juegos de disparos, añadir este tipo de mecánicas ocultas al jugador. Por ejemplo, la última bala del cargador siempre hace más daño. Esto es algo que se ve mucho en Call of Duty. En Battlefield 4, por ejemplo, las primeras 2-3 partidas que usabas un arma nueva en el multijugador, el arma hacía más daño. Extra Credits tiene un vídeo muy bueno de ello, échale un ojo. No le voy a hacer justicia en 10 segundos.
Vale.
Actually, someone can pass the link of that. Well, someone, Jose, you're going to be
On my way.
the one to do it. Okay, thank you. Okay, anything else?
I have a question, but I think it will come up later, so I am going to wait. And if in an hour or so you
Okay.
you haven't talked to us about it, I will ask.
Great, perfect, yes. Because a lot of things are recurrent. That's kind of the point, as we're going to see. But yeah. Anything else now? Gonna take that as a no. We're continuing. Right into the midterm. Okay, so now I'm gonna have to explain a bit what you do in the midterm. As I kind of talked before, the midterm is you're in the map, you have to do things on the map to complete it. The completion of the map can kind of be anything. It can be kill all the enemies, It's usually like capture a fortress. It could be escape the map. But the actions you do within the map are always the same. So those can be the capturing, the rescuing, which is basically you can take one of your units and kind of put them inside the same tile that you have, so they cannot be attacked, but your stats go down. So basically you become a worse unit, but you put a unit to safety. It's trade-off, and it's kind of cool. And we have the capture mechanic now. Yes, if you have gone to any of my previous presentations, this is like godly. This is big brain mechanic. Basically, it's the same as the rescue mechanic, but you can do that with the enemy. And it's basically you get worse attacks both for attacking and when you have captured the enemy, but you can get their items. So basically, most items that the enemies have, you could theoretically have them, which expands the possibilities so much. But I will stop talking about the capture mechanic because I get lost. You can attack normally, just attack the enemy and kill them. You can use an item or change weapon. There's a couple of things you can do in this menu. You can use a healing staff or any other kind of staff for that purpose. And you can move, which is kind of the most basic one. This is kind of the basics. There are some other things you can do, but they don't really matter. And what's interesting is that they are very similar in the way they are structured. As you can see, the capture mechanic is basically the rescue mechanic plus the attack mechanic. And the way the menus are presented is also very similar. Using an item or attacking or using a staff is also the same menu. It's those two from the right. And moving, I think it's very explicit and self-explanatory how do you move in this game. So basically, it's really easy to understand what is going on in the maps, but because they have different effects and they affect the development of the map and the way in which you move and interact with others in very diverse ways, it's somewhat difficult to have all of those options in your mind while you're playing. So kind of easy to learn, hard to master. I don't know if you've ever heard that quote. It's a very important one. I don't remember if it was Sid Meier or Bashner, but it was like one of these big quotes at the beginning of. Sorry.
It's I think it's like the quote of Atari, like easy to play, hard to master.
That must be it. Yeah, so it's like one of those big quotes from when the industry started to form.
I think it's a really great quote. However, I don't know if you feel the same, but I feel like it has been overheard, and I actually heard a variant of it, or not a variant, but like basically it's the same but said with synonyms, and it's the difference between depth and complexity, which is not exactly the same two words.
I had a slide that was about complexity and complication.
Okay.
And like, but like I kind of killed it because like, it's gonna come out at some point. So like this is perfect because like, yeah, basically.
Nice. Okay, yeah, I just wanted to like the phrase is good, but I really like when for a really repeated sentence you get like synonyms or other ways to say it. It's nice to like it's refreshing. I mean.
Yep. So yeah, basically this is kind of like what you're doing in the maps. You're moving and you're interacting with other units. Nothing too complicated. Except it is, right? So when I was doing this, basically don't care. Okay, I started doing a draft and this got overcomplicated and I was like, I'm not passing these into a computer. I'm just putting a screenshot here. It's not relevant, just for you to understand. There's a lot of things affecting a lot of other things, right? And that's good. Or not. We're gonna see about it. I kind of did put it in a computer, but it's not all the information. I kind of like this format because there's a lot more compact in here, but for now, we're just gonna deal with this. The only real thing that you have to care about is those three big things. I don't know if you're seeing my mouse. Combat conditioners, positioning, fighting progression. Basically, what you care in the midterm is what are your numbers to go attack a unit? What is your positioning? because, of course, if you go attack a unit and you win, but then you are surrounded by other 10 units, not a very good move, if you ask me. And then you have the fighting progression. I don't really feel very comfortable with that name. I just couldn't think of anything better to name this category. But it's basically okay, I just thought of a better name, map progression, big brain. Basically, it's from the moment you start to the moment you end. There are some factors that are going to be changing. And at the beginning of the next map, they are going to reset. Like, what is the initial health of your characters? Or, like, what items can you buy in that map? And, like, what are you doing with those? Whatever. But now we go to the cool stuff. In this point of the gameplay, of the loop, the core game loop, the player is taking a lot of decisions. In fact, I would say most, if not all, the decisions are taken here. The most basic ones to understand is like where to move, which enemies to attack, which enemies can be left to win experience for the weaker units. In case that you couldn't kill all the enemies that are on range, which allies should bait the enemies, which should protect other allies, even which allies, if you don't have enough units to kind of form a barrier, which units should be uncovered and like which should be at more risk of death. If you should even attack, because sometimes you just want to play defensive, kind of like turtle formation. Which items to use? You're gonna get some good items, but they are limited. They can only be used, for example, 3 times. Is this now the moment to use them, or is it better to save them from later? I kind of made this probability consideration and adapt to RNG different categories. Basically, the probability consideration is the idea that if you're going to attack a unit and you have an 80% of hit, you're considering if that 80% is worth or is good enough to execute that attack instead of using that unit for something else. The adaptation to RNG, on the other hand, is once you have already attacked and the result of the randomness has been specified and you know what it is, how do you adapt to that if it's different to what you were expecting? For example, in this case, if you miss the 80%.
Because I take it, sorry for interrupting, that there are no like RNG like safeguards or ways to manipulate or change that RNG. You only know what is going to happen after the fact, and you can't go back. No.
Yes. Oh boy, we're going to a very deep rabbit hole here. Yes, technically, for a normal player, there isn't a way to go back. In the later entrances of Fire Emblem, I think there has been the 3 late games or the 2 last games. You can go back for a certain amount of turns, but no, in this game you can do that. What you can do though is based on the positioning of your units. There's the mechanic that's the supports, which is if you are in a range of 3 tiles from a unit that supports to another unit, and there's like a specific unit supporting specific units, they
like
get
a flowchart. Or...
Yeah.
Okay.
I had it somewhere. I don't think I'm gonna find it now. I can pass it later, but in 2 hours maybe we don't remember.
Okay, no problem.
but it's like if you type Thracia 776 support, and you go to Google Images, you should find it basically. And basically, if you put such a unit near another unit, you can get an extra 10% of avoidance and hit. So technically, you can manipulate the RNG, but it's not the same manipulation of like you get the numbers that are running in code and like taking advantage of that, or manipulating it with like moving stuff. And of course, we have the capture mechanic, which is like, yes, Lord and Savior capture mechanic. And what's kind of important of all of those is that this creates situational risks, safety, and predictability scope. Predictability. What does this mean? It's basically the idea that you're not overloading your player with a lot of information. You have a bunch of factors. You have how you're fighting, what's your numbers, what's your position. And with that, at every combat that is happening, that situation is going to change. And you're going to have your player adapt to that new situation constantly. And the variables are never going to change. You always play with the same. You get used to using the same variables all over again. But because every situation is so important, and because permadeath exists, and every situation has or can have really important consequences, there's a certain thrill in making sure that every step of the way is done correctly. I hear someone wanted to speak, maybe?
No, it's okay. Sorry.
Okay. And well, the program also does things because, of course, it has to. But as you can see, and we're going to talk more about the depth of the midterm now. And eventually, we're going to have to talk about the long term. But for now, I want to talk about non-correct decisions. Basically, what Fire Emblem, and specifically this game, is everything is about positioning. If you could start the turn in the position that you desired, you would always win, unless you don't know how to do maths, like it's my case. But generally speaking, positioning is everything in this game. And what's cool is that tied to positioning are the events. Like sometimes you're just going to enter a certain zone, and that's going to trigger an event. Or maybe at a certain turn count, like at turn 7, an event is going to trigger. So basically, the way in which you move through the map creates a certain events that have some long-term benefits. You get a new unit, or you get an object, or on the other hand, lots of reinforcements are coming, so you get in a dangerous position. But on the other hand, positioning also influences your combat engagement, your numbers. As I kind of explained before, supports, but also, for example, trading weapons, rescuing, any kind of support that could be derived from other units. And those are kind of antagonistic, because usually you want to play offensively to get where the events are the faster before they leave or they get destroyed or whatever. But at the same time, you want to stick together to have the better battle performance. And you cannot really have all those objects and all those cool stuff that the events are giving you without risking a certain mobility with your units. And what's interesting is that all of these influences how you play, the decisions that you're taking. And like those that I kind of explained can be offensive, defensive. It could be a baiting strategy. It could be kind of a YOLO, you send the 3 strongest units at the front and then the others kind of do their thing. It can be a lot of things. And like those directly influence the short term. All of those determine what, well, together with the RNG, of course, what your battling is going to be like. And what's cool is that the player has to choose those. The player has to discard either the security of everyone going together or the benefits of obtaining new items or new characters for the benefits of the other. And when this happens, and it happens according to their plan, according to what they wanted, it's glorious success. Because this is not simply a decision of the player decided to go one route and succeeded. This is more of the player had to step away from something they wanted to get something they wanted even more. So by discarding this first part, they get to give more value to the thing they achieve. And in a way, and this is definitely not because I've been playing a lot of Dark Souls and a lot of fighting games lately, in Dark Souls, you have the option to use a huge range of weapons. And I don't know if it's specific to Dark Souls because I'm not very cultured in this aspect. But basically, you can kill giant bosses with a dagger, or you can kill them with a dragon teeth, right? And like the dragon teeth is the slowest thing in the world, the dagger you can stab someone 5 times per second. So basically, the player has this huge range of options, and they have all these ways in which they can confront the same challenge. But at the same time, we have fighting games in which every single move can be very determinant, and there's always a best decision to make. Because kind of like tying with Luca's presentation, everything is numbers. If you know that an attack is gonna leave you negative, and that like you're gonna like the opponent is gonna start attacking earlier than you will, the solution is defend until you get the opportunity to counterattack. So kind of mixing those two, there's this system of non-correct decisions in which you have the freedom to choose whatever you want, but you also need the efficiency of picking the best decision or picking a decision that feels like is more important or more relevant to what you want to achieve. And I think this is kind of the best of both worlds, and is definitely what keeps the thrill and the emotional experience that is, for me at least, Thracia 776 as it is. And this doesn't only apply to this game, this is kind of the whole thing of tactical RPGs. Like, as far as I know, which is not much, XCOM kind of relies in the same idea of, okay, so you have actions that have huge consequences, and you have objectives, you have to prioritize them, and you have to give something to get a certain reward. And like, kind of concluding this midterm, you should avoid having correct decisions. As like, this is basic game design, but it's like the game design that we need the most. If there's a choice that is obvious, it's a formality, not a choice. Risk reward, which I think is the next thing. It's not, whatever. Risk reward is like the most important thing. If you have the player choose something over not having anything, of course they will choose something. It's because they make them choose between two different things that there is something generated in the player. The player has to think. The player is playing. And that is what creates the emotional thrive. A small kind of notation on engaging strategy. It's kind of defined by uncertainty and predictability. Basically, if you want a game in which you have to think to be entertaining, there has to be a certain RNG, which is kind of what I talked about before. If the RNG generates the challenge, you will have a Mario Party, basically. It's like, there's no skill, you just play, and whoever has the biggest luck wins. But if you want to make something that the player has to think about and has to overcome based on pure skill, and for example, not reflexes, like there's a part in fighting games that is reflexes, even though everything is math. If you're going to give them infinite time, like Thracia does, there must be a certain element of uncertainty, which is the RNG. Because if not, if you could just pick a notebook and a pen and start writing numbers down and decompose everything that's going to happen, two possible things can happen. Your player gets bored because everything is predictable, or your player gets bored because they have to do a lot of maths, and that's not necessarily fun. Both can happen at the same time. So basically, if you want to make a strategy game, have a certain element that the player cannot compute. It doesn't have to be necessarily RNG, but it has to go along the line. And kind of a sentence I really liked is this: increase the FPS, don't overload the RAM. Which is basically kind of what I was talking about. Don't try to have the player keep track of this huge amount of variables. Have the same variables, but have them iterate over the situation that those are distributed in to kind of make those decisions. And yeah, okay. End of the midterm conclusions. If anyone has any questions, now's the moment. Yep. Yeah, doing the tier list. Wait a moment. Basically, what he's saying is that he thinks that the idea that I kind of talked about of XCOM and how it plays with the positioning is interesting, and it relates to something that they were talking the other day about why Alex, in this case, doesn't like XCOM. Continue. Oh. And basically, what annoys him about the XCOM, is the XCOM series or is the XCOM 1 specifically? Okay, the series is that there are very focused objectives. Like you always are given what you have to do for every chapter, and because it doesn't give a lot of freedom to the player, it feels not as good to him. And actually, it's interesting because I talked about this in the previous presentation, I think it was, in which I talked about like how Thracia has two narratives actually, and one is about what the story is saying, and the other one is like what your personal story within the game is.
Yeah,
And-
I remember that this question from the prior presentation. Yeah, you did.
And basically is like when you start a map in Thracia 776, you do have an objective. Like there's something that you have to do, but because there's the secondary narrative about which units stay alive, what is the state of your army, and what you as a leader are doing to keep that army alive, that Thracia can kind of allow itself to have this diversity on decisions. Any other question?
Sí, yo tengo una pregunta. Cuando has dicho que, de una parte en la que has dicho, estoy parafraseando un poco, los juegos de lucha son todo números. Entiendo que te refieres a el mejor combo suele ser el combo que hace más daño. Eso es lo que querías decir.
Yeah, well, in the sense that ideally, if like you're a computer that runs at 60 FPS per hour per second, per hour, that would be bad. Basically, you could always take the best decision because like everything is numbers in the sense that you know that if your opponent is attacking with a certain move, that move has X number of startup frames, X number of recovery, X damage. It can combo into certain routes, and like if you have an invincible move, if crouching, you would evade that. Like what I mean with numbers is that everything is deterministic.
Yeah,
Sí, pero te voy a poner un ejemplo un pelín raro. Chip del Guilty Gear tiene un
Yeah.
combo de media vida.
Mhm.
Súper sencillo de hacer, por cierto. Es
Sounds
de los
bad.
peores combos que hay en el juego. Porque cuando terminas ese combo, el enemigo acaba en el suelo mientras tú estás en el aire cayendo. Y ahí
Okay,
te
so
comes
you're
el combo de tu vida.
Yeah. Well, in this case, it's still deterministic. Like it's still
Sí,
like
pero,
I get where you're going. Of course, if you're
pero no
just a machine,
depende de un valor numérico matemático.
yeah, correct. If you're just a machine taking decisions by the moment, like right now, what is the thing that does more damage? I see why this would be a bad decision. And yes,
Pero
it's
Yo,
Yeah.
yo estoy de acuerdo con la visión que tiene Ferran de los juegos de pelea, de que son puramente matemáticas, porque sí que no es verdad, sí que es verdad que no es un valor matemático como el daño del combo, pero lo que sí es un valor matemático es la recovery que está teniendo Chip en el aire, ¿no? Y esto una máquina también lo tendría en cuenta para ejecutar sus cálculos, por ejemplo, el decir que después de hacer ese combo se queda en el aire recuperándose, y de hecho podría ir tan lejos como para determinar cuál es el daño que le harán con el combo al caer en función del personaje, porque es todo exacto. Entonces yo no creo que sea tan... Es que es eso, ¿no? Todos son números en ese sentido, porque luego, si yo te hago un combo del 50% de la vida, pero sé que el combo que vas a hacer tú va a ser del 59%, pues entonces no me conviene hacerlo, pero sigue siendo todo cálculos matemáticos. O sea, yo estoy bastante de acuerdo con la visión y es que es verdad. En realidad todos son números en general, pero es en... Y luego en los juegos de pelea podríamos entrar a discutir como también entra el tema de las reacciones que comentaba él, pero bueno, yo solo quería decir que estoy de acuerdo con la analogía. Estoy de acuerdo, de hecho, con que todos son números en general. En los videojuegos, es que son programas al final.
Yeah. Okay. I was gonna go there. Like actually, like if you had a machine, you could just iterate over every map of Fire Emblem and just have them complete perfectly. But yeah, like but in the case of fighting games, it's very evident because it's like usually the interaction is hit to hit or combo to combo, so it's much easier to respond to that than just like in Fire Emblem you could make like the rational thought of like, oh, I play defensive so they cannot kill me, and then suddenly there's like 70 reinforcements around you and you're like, that wasn't the best choice there. And it's not like numerically you could still be like, okay, so what there may be a certain combination of RNG and like stats that would allow me to overcome this. But like towards the player, there's like a bigger range of interactions that you have to consider than just what leaves you in positive and negative. Which of course, as Jose pointed out, like it can be much more than that. But like generally speaking. Any other question about the midterm? Suppose that's a nope. So we're moving on. Surprise, surprise, we're going to the long term. Who could have expected it? Alwyn. Such a good character. Basically, what I put this here because like her weapons are like the best that she could have, and like I'm really proud of that. So I just had to show it off. What we're gonna care about in the long term, not a lot. Battle readiness, battle performance. What this means is basically, is the player ready to face the latest parts of the game? Like, do they have objects and weapons enough for everyone? And battle performance is like, do they have good units? Are the units capable of dealing damage? It's really basic, and because of that, the long term is also kind of basic. Kind of like what the long term points you towards. I mean, it's difficult to say that Fire Emblem has a long term, because kind of the long term is just the consequences of the midterm, but in a really long term. So it's kind of like the midterm, but extended. But what I wanted to kind of touch upon is what I'm going to follow up this talk with. Is basically the idea that long term, what it's preparing you to do is to be cautious and to adapt to the different changes and challenges that you're gonna see on the maps. And basically, this all kind of amounts to keen leadership. Like, what this game is trying to make you do is take decisions like a leader would. And this will tie up with this thing that we talk with the PCC of like what the designers are trying to make you see. But it's gonna still be a while before we get there. Wow, that was fast. Long-term conclusions. Basically, this game is, if you don't get your units killed, you're gonna have a final map that is not so complicated. It's very simple. But what's important, quote unquote, about this is that penalties should correlate to player knowledge. Basically, if there was this super secret thing that would happen at the end, depending on a certain condition, you better tell the player about that condition, or else this is going to be considerably unfair. And that's why Sans is here. We're going to talk about him later, but as for now, maybe some of you already know where I'm trying to go with this. But yeah, we're not really going to talk much about this. Anyone wants to add anything on the long term that doesn't mean Sans?
Yeah, I have a question about the gameplay.
Yeah.
You say as long as everyone survives, you're going to have like a nice final map or final challenge. Do you think the game actually expects you to get there with no one killed? Is that like the intentionality?
Nope. Like this game, excuse me for the language, but this game is gonna fuck you. Like,
Okay.
this game comes at you and it's like, bro, you're gonna have a bad time. Kind of similar to Sans, ironically. Like, this game wants you to suffer a lot.
So,
but
he is not expecting you to have like a full party at
exactly. Like,
okay.
in a way, the game knows that the game is not gonna allow you to have a full party, so it's kind of gonna give you the units to. It's not really like having a full
like
party.
compensate or
Yeah, like you're gonna have units. The question is if these units are going to be strong enough to get to be efficient in the final map.
So as a long-term conclusion, is it fair to say that you can get like soft locked in the end? Like a button of run can get you soft locked in the end?
Technically, yes. And actually, technically, in every single Fire Emblem, you could get soft locked really easily. Because permadeath exists, and the game only resets when you kill the protagonist.
Okay.
Technically, you could just lose all your units and end up just with the protagonist. And the most that you could go back is like the chapter previous to the last chapter. Like, you would have 2 maps to level up at best.
Okay.
But of course, the game is like, usually you get a really good unit or a decent enough unit at the previous map to the end. So like there's design choices done.
Yeah, like
in between.
fail safe, no?
Exactly.
In case. Okay. Gotcha.
To avoid that kind of stuff.
Thank you.
Oops. There we go. Wait, anything else? First of all. Okay, good. Okay, so business. All right. So we talked about Fire Emblem and like what it is about. Why do I think this game is so good? And in fact, this kind of like applies to all tactical RPGs, but we're gonna see later why this game excels onto it. So it's basically because in each one you want to do something, right? In the short term, you want to kill the enemy. In the midterm, you want to keep your units alive and complete the map. And in the long term, you want to complete the game. And what's cool is that the decisions that you're taking can be a positive to each one, but it can also be a negative to another one. So, for example, imagine you have a really hard, really powerful boss, and they have like 2 HP left. You're about to kill them, and if you don't kill them now, they're gonna counterattack you and probably kill some of your units. So it seems like attacking him or her and killing him or her is like the best option. What if this boss is surrounded by like 10 units? In that case, that unit that you're going to attack the boss with is going to get screwed. Or at least they're going to face a very high chance of death. So it's this kind of decision of risk-reward that we also talked about before that makes this game so interesting, because every single battle makes you rethink and makes you consider again if the odds have changed enough for you to change your strategy. And the reason why this game is so good at this in comparison to other tactical RPGs is because it has a series of factors, of decisions, design decisions, the good ones, that make this the more apparent. For example, weapon choice. I already talked about this in our presentation. Basically, weapons are extremely relevant in this game, much more than stats are. And this generates a very easy dynamism. Because imagine that you have a weapon that hits really hard, but that makes you really slow. You can kill a unit with it, but if you have other units that are going to counterattack you, and you cannot hit KO them, and let me tell you, you're not going to one-hit KO them by any means, you are in danger because suddenly they are going to double you. They're going to do more damage for you to kill this specific enemy. And because weapons have so much weight and so much importance in the gameplay, it is that this kind of decision is done. So ways to solve this, for example, would be to trade the weapon with another unit. But of course, this means sacrificing the turn of that unit to attacking to instead change that weapon. And of course, it also means leaving them exposed. You can rescue, but of course, then you're exposing the rescuing unit, etc. Like there's a lot of things that come out from just the idea that weapons are more prevalent than stats. Another thing they do is like the move. The move is so important. And it's interesting because since moving affects so many things and is such a central pillar to the game, anytime that you move a unit, you're changing something. Even if it's not much. It sometimes is a lot, but every move basically has a certain importance codified within. And that's quite important. Capture, already talked about this, but one thing that I maybe didn't mention last time is that it allows you to regulate the challenge. And what I mean with this is basically a designer's wet dream. It's basically, if the player is getting bored, they make use of the capture mechanic. Because the game expects them in a lot of decisions that I'm not going to talk about because I've already done in other presentations. But basically, the game tells you, you should use the capture mechanic. And because it's not pushing you to use it at every opportunity that you have, but it's also pushing you enough to know that you should use it from time to time. The best way in which the player can make use of this mechanic is when they are kind of getting bored or they don't really have anything to do. For example, it's the end of the map or it's the beginning of the map. or like they are in the mid map, but there's kind of like a resting place, and there's just like 2 units. So basically, the capture mechanic is a way to literally have the player never be bored, which I think is like such a big brain move, and I'm surprised it's really nowhere. Well, like there are other games that have these kind of mechanics, but it's very not talked about in the design community, which is not like so well. I'm not into it so much to actually know everything that's going on it, but I think I have seen enough design videos and people talking about the topic to have never come across this. Feels a bit weird, especially because it's so relevant, so important. And I'm gonna talk about it a bit more in the conclusions, but let's move on. Another thing it does really well is the idea of the recruitment, because it's basically a really high risk, high reward. It's this kind of decisions that is what's gonna make the spies. And it's basically the idea of, okay, you have certain units that you know how they work, you know how usable they are. Are you going to sacrifice their well-being to get a new unit? You can kind of deduce the potential of this new unit by their stats, by their weapons, their class, etc. But you don't really know if you have a place for that unit in your army. So it's that exchange between having someone, like having a safe position in case some of your units die, and then you can replace them with this new unit, in exchange of actually risking your current units. Which I think is, and especially because most recruitments are asked to be done via capture, which is a mechanic that lowers your attack and your stat capabilities. So it basically increases even more that risk-reward relation. Okay, so kind of the mini conclusions about this affect a lot of things with your decisions. If your consequences are important, the player is gonna care about them. But of course, also you have to make the player care about them. Like it's not enough just to like this may sound a bit contradictory, but it's not enough to just tell the player that the odds are really high. The player has to understand that what they are doing is going to condition how well they will perform. And kind of an interesting classification I've thought of is the pure positive, the pure negatives, and the tools. Basically, the pure positives is the factors that are always good, like damage. You never want to deal less damage in Thracia. It's always about attacking, so doing more damage is always good. The pure negatives, it's the contrary. For example, and well, weight doesn't really apply to that. For example, getting poisoned. Getting poisoned is not really good. It will always be a detriment. You can argue like, well, maybe you want to reach a certain HP threshold, yada yada. Maybe for the attack it could be the same. Like maybe you don't want to kill a certain unit because you want to experience feed another unit. Minor things. It's usually always going to be a negative. But then there's the tools, and this is like the things that I think we should try to design the best, which is basically the mechanics that will interact with other systems, and depending on which they interact with, will cause positive or negative effects. And it's complex. It's difficult to, like, I think conceptually is rather simple. It's just something that is not like a correct or a very specific result-based decision. But when you're going to design this, you're going to find this is kind of difficult to implement correctly, because it's basically a dynamic generator. We're going to talk about the MDA later, but it has a certain complexity and craft, and you're just going to have to learn how to do these kind of things. Again, risk versus reward. This is like the golden rule. We are doing video games. Video games are about decisions. So, like, make the player take decisions. Risk versus reward is not the only way to make the player take a decision, but it's one of the most powerful ones. So it's why it's so highlighted in this presentation. Kind of like what I said about the capture mechanic. I'm not thinking that you should have an equivalent to the capture mechanic, but you should have a way to empower the player's fun by themselves. And the way in which you implement that is extremely varied and can be in so many different ways, which is kind of what I talked about me being surprised that no one really talks about this, about like how the player can generate their own fun within the fun that the designer is planning within the level. And finally, abstractly, managing things is fun. Like when I talk about managing things, people tend to like look at me like weird, like why do you do this to yourself? But actually, video games are just that. Is managing resources, is managing your health against your attack, your risk versus your reward, your offense, your defense. Everything is managing things. So when you're trying to create these kind of dynamics, try to find a way for the player to take, which completely relates to the risk reward. Try to find a mechanic that makes these decisions of tying things together. Any kind of comments about this? This has been a bit more messy, but it kind of is the bridge between the two parts, so we couldn't put it in any other way. Sorry. Any comments?
I really like the differentiation between pure negative, pure positives, and tools, and I think that there's always ways to transform both, like pure positives and pure negative. It looks to me like sometimes you are able to transform pure positives into tools, right? This got me thinking about a game that I have been playing lately, which is not a fighting game. It's Rogue Legacy, and in which you have to like equip your character, and you have a really simple system, right? A weight system, and if you have to if you have a limit of weight, right, and you can just put certain items in there, but depending on the character that you're using, you might be more interested in having bigger stats, so like better items weight more. So you have to make a decision there. Like the best things, the pure positives, would be having all the stats maxed out, right? But since you only have a certain amount of weight, a certain amount of items that you can put in, you have to make decisions between having more of one stat or more of the other, and this also depends on the class that you are playing in the game. So I don't know, like they could just have really easily said, okay, if you buy an item, just put it on, and that's it. But this would make the system much less interesting. The fact that you have to choose makes it so it's a tool, and makes it more fun and interesting for the player, right?
Yep. In fact, there's like kind of, if you go to communities that are really niche, the kind of things that are appreciated is precisely these. And I think I talked about this somewhere else, but I might just be screwing this up. I don't remember. But basically, it's the idea that like those things that are supposed to be very established and systemic nuisance. No, I don't think nuance. Sorry, I don't think I've talked about that. I skipped it. But it's basically, you remember that draft that I put a screenshot of like me drawing all that lines and whatever.
Yeah, absolutely.
In it, I realized that there are like accumulations of mechanics. Like there are for example, the positioning mechanics, the combat factors mechanic, etc. And kind of like there's a list, the list of mechanics. You can kind of englobe each list under a certain general category, but there are some minute mechanics that don't really change what the functioning of the game is. It doesn't really change the outcome. It's just a way to minimally optimize what you're doing, and that nuance is like super cool, and it really relates to this thing that you were saying of like this thing that is generally thought of as a pure positive. You can kind of spin it in a way to take advantage of it, or like in the other way around, if a pure negative, to actually take advantage of it and like use it in your favor. And it's something really cool, and it's what kind of gives a different kind of depth.
Sure.
So, anyone else? Great. Going to the next one then. What was it? Oh, right. Okay. So basically, yeah, this is basically going to be short-term, mid-term, long-term. Those things relate to each other, so that's why it works. So we're gonna see it in a bit more length and in a lens that I like specifically. So basically, as I said, the game is this, and each thing has its own components. Everyone knows what the MDA is. the MDA framework. Okay, I'm gonna put it.
Mechanics, dynamics, and aesthetics.
Yeah, correctly. Is there anyone who doesn't know? I should put it the other way
I
around
mean,
because
I think we know, but since this is getting recorded, maybe we should explain.
oh, okay, that's really fair actually. The MDA is a framework that is basically as Luke as well pointed out, it means mechanics, dynamics, aesthetics. Is a framework of design that basically takes the smallest part of a video game, the actions that you can do, which are the mechanics, and then builds upon them, making the dynamics. Like it makes those mechanics interact between each other, and those generate a certain result. This is called a dynamic. And then this amount of dynamics, by existing in the same environment, create a certain feel, which is the aesthetics. Not to confuse with aesthetics, which is something different. It's a false friend. And basically, it's a framework. It's a methodology to create a video game from the lowest to the highest. And you can imagine the player being in the aesthetics kind of right part, which is like how they perceive the game as a whole, and the designer in the left part, the mechanics, which is like the building blocks that make the game. And like, is this the MDA? Not really. In the midterm, you can move. Moving is a mechanic. So like, this doesn't have much to do. But why does the MDA work? I don't know if anyone wants to answer this for me, but I can answer it if you want. But participate, whatever. Okay.
Why
then.
does it why does it work? But in which level? Like as a design framework or as a play experience, or what are we talking about?
As a design framework, why is the MDA so popular, and why so many people use it to understand how they create and what their game is? Or like a reason, because they can be multiple.
I think it's plainly used mainly because it's simple. It's just like some simple steps you can take your game across and like checkbox everything.
Yep, I'm kind of going towards there.
Okay.
Basically, it's like what I feel the MDA does is it allows to take a very complicated whole, and it allows to compartmentalize it. And basically, this is kind of what we're doing here. Like, this game, Thracia 776, and in general, most Fire Emblems, are very easy to learn because the short term is just extremely basic. It's just, you just have to watch the animations and the HP. It's that simple. And the one who gets at 0 HP loses. Like, that's it. The long term is extremely abstract, and you cannot really like influence it noticeably. It's just the accumulation of everything that happens in the middle. And the midterm is not so simple that you can just understand how you're doing on it, or like how much are you progressing on it, as you do with the short term. But it's also not so complex that you feel lost within it. So I think that this distribution of making your game in different kind of ways, or like in different compartmentalizations, is a really good way to view how you want your player to perceive the gameplay, even though it doesn't really completely correlate to MDA. I think the concept is comparable enough to work. And a thing that I really like is, what about the ADM or DAMD? And like, those are not official names by any means. But I've seen recurrently, and I think the first time I actually heard about this was in John Ponce's classes. And it's basically, what about designing the other way around? Because a common complaint that people have about the MDA is that it's too mechanic. It's too on the side of the designer. You're starting on like what actions the player can do, and then you end with what the player feels about the game. But some studios actually take the contrary approach. For example, Genova Chen, I don't remember. Yeah, no, I completely remember their name. That Game Studio, if I'm not sorry, that game company. Basically, the creators of Journey, of Flower. I think there's another one. I don't know if it's Flow. I know there's a third one. and also the creative minds behind Abzu, if I'm not completely incorrect, although I think it's another studio. Basically, they begin their design through what they want the player to feel, and then like they kind of not necessarily go directly to the dynamics, and that's why I talked about the AMD, because the dynamics is this middle point that is certainly complex, but it's also very dependent on the mechanics. So it's sometimes better to just know what you want the player to feel, and then go directly to the mechanics, and then go to the dynamics. And this will relate a bit to Sans, but we still are not going to talk about him. But just kind of like talking about this idea of like different ways of understanding this MDA, and just the general concept that when you're interrelating the different parts of your game, you're making it better because everything makes more sense than if everything is just separate blocks. Okay. Yeah, sure. Basically, there's more thing. This game has more mechanics than I've talked about. And kind of like the question is, how did they not screw this? How does this work? Like I think is a masterpiece. How did these men, Mr. Shozo Kaga, actually like achieve to make this? And to answer that, is we're gonna go kind of like into the more subjective part of the presentation. I want to ask you about what is a good video game, and this is the part I fear we may get stuck to, but it's also the part I want to get stuck to. So please give me all your opinions.
Since this is a question like everybody can answer, I think it's better if we like take turns, if this makes sense. So for me is a good video game. It's about first and foremost engagement on an intellectual level and an emotional level, and also about intrinsic reward. So what kind of reward are you having as a person doing this activity, and is the time you are spending that worth it to you?
Great. Alex, please. Oh, but Alex is recording. Yeah, okay, perfect.
Vale, sí. O sea, yo creo que más que lo que el juego te da a ti, creo que un buen juego es el que consigue lo que se propone. No a nivel de scope, sino a nivel de feel. De yo quiero que esto sea un juego de peleas tácticas, ¿no? Por turnos, que tenga un gran impacto narrativo y que los jugadores establezcan vínculos emocionales con los personajes along the way. Y ahí tienes Fire Emblem, ¿no? Pues bueno, definición muy vaga, he jugado muy poco, pero eso.
Yep. As a question, if a game's objective is to make a lot of money, and it makes a lot of money, do you consider that a good game?
It's a good product, not a good game. No, porque yo iba más por a nivel emocional del jugador, no tanto a nivel de producto. Entonces, así con eso te podría justificar que todas las películas que salen de Hollywood son buenas películas porque buscan hacer dinero y lo consiguen. No son buenas películas, son buenos productos. Que claro, es lo que intentan ir, pero si a nivel emocional no intentas nada, entonces tu producto a nivel artístico no es nada.
Oh, yes.
A mí me
Okay.
gustaría comentarte algo a ti, luego en castellano, porque como sigue tu respuesta. Me ha gustado lo que has dicho a nivel de diferenciar videojuego y producto. Creo que es una distinción muy necesaria, porque hay muchos juegos que son más productos que juegos. Y te das cuenta cuando el foco del equipo directivo va más a nivel de encuestas de retención de jugadores o de tiempos de juego a juego, ¿no? Y ves que empiezan a meter cosas en los juegos como patrones que causan adicción desmesuradamente o que dificultan que el jugador se gestione su tiempo, por ejemplo, ¿no? Cosas que hayamos visto como prácticas rollo Skinner Box, cosas de este estilo, ¿no? Así que realmente puedes tener grandes productos a nivel comercial, pero como juegos rozan cosas que yo diría que deben ser hasta ilegales, ¿no? Pero bueno.
Sí.
I love you. Yes, I've actually thought about doing a gacha presentation because I have schemes and drafts about the gachas because they are the devil.
Ponla en cola, Lucas, ahora mismo. Ponla en
No,
cola ahora mismo.
no, son of a gun. There are other topics I want to talk
Ferran,
about.
que te ayudo, que te ayudo. Hazme caso, todo va a salir bien.
Okay, but I'm gonna do it. Whatever. Because there's so much to go on to, but not now because we're doing engines and that requires my time, and I've already put a lot of time in this, so not a good idea. Anyway, let's forget that. Arnau, can you talk for us, or do we go? Oh, okay.
Yes. Bueno, no lo he pensado mucho porque me he explicado un poco en bragas, pero para mí un buen videojuego sería aquel... Es que es muy cutre, pero aquel que consigue divertirte, porque no deja de ser un juego el que consigue atraparte, digamos. No sabría ahora cómo explicarlo bien, pero no sé si me explico.
Yeah,
No sé.
Magic Circle, I understand. Flow, all those concepts.
Yeah, exactly.
Okay.
Pues no sé. O sea, así de simple y complejo, supongo. Que te divierta, que te guste, que esté un mínimo de bien hecho, entiendo.
Okay.
Así improvisado sin haberlo pensado, ¿eh? Es que me has pillado, ya te digo.
Yeah, I know that's what I wanted because it's like it's better to just like how do you feel about it more than what do you think about it.
Okay.
Juan, are you here or do we skip? Rip. We're going to Jose. No, Nani. Sad story. Oh, wow.
José
Hey,
No, es que me ha sacado de la llamada.
I know.
Repíteme un momento la pregunta, por favor.
Yeah, what do you consider a good video game?
Para mí un buen videojuego es aquel que satisface la intención con la que lo he comprado.
Okay, so it's more about the player.
Sí, por ejemplo, me gustan mucho los juegos para que todo lo que tenga delante mío explote y sencillamente quitar estrés de encima. Me gustan juegos que tienen un foco en relajación. Me gustan los juegos competitivos. Me gustan los juegos como experiencias. Y agruparlos en... Tienen que tener esto, deja fuera a unos de otros. La diferenciación que ha hecho Alex entre producto y... llamémoslo... Yo lo llamaría más bien obra artística. Para mí hay varias divisiones más. Pero es algo como muy personal de para qué quiero usar yo este juego.
Yes. Good. Lucas, well, unless Jose wants to add anything else. I imagine. Okay.
Well, I don't know. I consider, and I have always been of the opinion that a good game is a fun game. Dot. Right. Period. I mean, I wouldn't. I really don't think I wouldn't add anything else. Then you would go into one of the most complex questions that you can ask, which is what is fun, right? And that's something that well, people have already written thousands of books about, but I still don't know the exact answer. But I think all of us here know it, so I'm just gonna go with a classic thing and saying that a good game is it's a fun game, even if it doesn't have the. A good game is a fun game. Why would I go into any deeper? That's my opinion.
Cool. Thank you. Jessica? Know if you're there. Okay, seems like she's not available. Then, okay. Thank you for all your answers. The joke's on you because I have another question. Yit. What is good design? And this is like, it may be even more complicated to us that we are design nerds, if you will.
Okay, I don't agree with you. I think that it's a simple question if
Okay.
we take in consideration the first one, because I think good design are the decisions that make good games. So if we have a definition of good game, then the answer becomes clear.
Yes.
So for me particularly, no, if a good game is about emotional and intellectual engagement, good design are choices that enable or facilitate your player to achieve that sentimental connection or that feeling and that intellectual stimulus.
Okay, I'm gonna kind of ask you a trap question, if you will.
Sure.
Does that mean then that if a game has good design choices, it becomes instantly a a good video game, even if it doesn't satisfy the player?
Okay, I think it does. I see where are you coming from, and I get, yeah, it's a trap question because the immediate answer is, well, it depends on the player, but depends. That answer really doesn't mean anything. So I think I know what you're trying to say, but hear me out. Okay, so a game can be extremely good, just not for you. The same way like music or a plate of food can be extremely good, just not for you. So if there's like an intentionality in a decision of this decision I am making is going to make my player feel X way, and that is correct, that statement is correct, it roll this it it's responsibility of the player purchasing or playing a game that has decisions that led to desirable feelings. But if the decision to create X feeling is there and that feeling is being created, then yes, it's a good game, regardless if you like it or not.
Oh, amazing, man. It's a bit unfair to have you first, to be honest, because we prepare each other in a way. But sure, yeah, I'm gonna say that's an acceptable answer, sir.
Thank
we
you.
all have our opinion or something. And go to the next. Mr. Alex, please. Right. Yes. Understandable. Now,
What is a good design? Pues esta es difícil, esta es una trampa muy... Si es difícil decir que es un buen videojuego, decir que es un buen diseño, supongo que es aquel que cumple, que se ajusta a las especificaciones que buscas conseguir. Digamos, cuando te planteas hacer un juego, te planteas qué tipo debe ser, qué tipo de juego, qué esperas que sienta el jugador un poco, qué tipo de diversión, exacto. Y un buen diseño supongo que es el que se ajusta a conseguir eso sin liar demasiado a la gente implicada en su desarrollo, imagino.
okay. Thank you. José?
Mm, Para mí, buen diseño son decisiones que llevan a un resultado deseado, que llevan al resultado que estás buscando. Esa sería como la primera capa. La segunda es, esas decisiones tienen que tener un juicio moral de antemano.
In what sense?
Gacha.
Okay, yeah. Understandable.
O sea,
I buy that.
es la forma más directa que tengo que decirlo.
Yeah.
Que tengo de decirlo.
Yeah.
Realmente, hostia, realmente no he mencionado nada de eso y joder, cuánta razón, ¿no? Me ha venido a la cabeza rollo World of Warcraft de te vamos a poner 13.000 misiones diarias y si no las haces te vamos a petar, ¿no? Y es como, hostia puta, realmente la decisión ha sido tomada, crea el sentimiento que busca, pero no es una decisión correcta, ¿sabes? O sea, mi corazón me dice que no es correcto. Sí, que toda la razón, sí, sí.
Aprovechando que estamos con el tema moralidad, creo que es una parte esencial porque ha salido Genshin Impact Es el primer gacha que ha llegado al público casual para extender el género.
Oh,
Que este ha
probably.
sido el primero, chavales.
Mhm.
Pero se acercan días oscuros.
Se acercan días oscuros o hay un tema que, bueno, ya lleva años. ¿Sabes? De hecho, vale, sabéis que en Europa y en otros países se intentó buscar una forma de legislar las loot boxes, ¿sí?
Yes.
Vale, sabéis lo mal que salió, ¿verdad?
They didn't follow it, actually.
Vaya,
But if you say
una
so.
vez más, Extracredits tiene un vídeo de
Oh, yes.
puta madre explicando. La gente hace
Que a lo
lo-
mejor tendría que rular por el canal de clase, ¿no?
Luego te lo busco, pavo.
Perfecto.
Eh,
Yeah.
Al final,
Hmm.
es el típico problema de siempre de la tecnología. De
Yeah.
quien toma las decisiones no es la gente con el conocimiento necesario para legislar eso. Hace no mucho también con las leyes de pipa, que eran unas leyes para reformar el internet y bla, bla, bla. Otra barbaridad. Extra Case tiene otro vídeo, por cierto. ¡Mua! Creo que sería inteligente, sería necesario empezar a tener la conversación de cómo legalizar, cómo legislar ciertos aspectos de los juegos.
Absolutely. In fact, and talking about gachas, Fire Emblem Heroes, which is like the Fire Emblem gacha that you should never play, has been prohibited in Belgium, I think it was, and like a couple more European countries, because like basically the difference between gambling and gachas, it's considered that gambling you're giving something for the chance of getting something back. In the gachas, you always are giving something and getting something in return.
Es
But of course, like it's like, yeah, but who wants this shitty character, right? Like
es un
technically,
problema de definiciones.
exactly. And it's like I hope at some point we're going to get enough understanding of what's going on to be able, because this is such a new thing. Like gambling took so many years to regulate properly, and it's not regulated properly right now. Like the very small things that we have has taken a lot of time. Luckily, with video games, it will maybe be different, but it's like we're in this period of like trying to adapt, and we definitely have to have this conversation of like what can we allow and what should be regulated.
Lo que a mí me da miedo no es que se legisle, porque se va a legislar y llegará un momento que se acabará haciendo bien. Va a pasar.
Hmm.
Lo que me da miedo es que llegue tarde.
Oh, definitely. And I think
Considerando
El daño que eso cause.
lo que te
Pues-
diría es que si hoy en día ya no está puesto es que ya ha llegado tarde.
yep.
O sea, el mercado está inundado de propuestas dudosas, por decirlo así, y esto ya no lo va a quitar nadie. El
Ahora
momento que
bien.
tienes,
¿Qué tan tarde va a llegar?
si llega, que yo te veo aquí tope de optimista, pero lo que dice Ferran, ¿eh? O sea, gambling en plan mal dicho, ¿no? Casino, lleva miles de años vigentes y todavía no está regulado. O sea, ya tú, ¿sabes? Pero yo esperaría sentado.
Yo soy de la opinión, o sea, yo tengo, well, I'm gonna speak in English because I can use the practice. I'm of the opinion that, like, I'm in a contradiction, right? Even if my feelings or my heart in some way tells me that it's not good, or it's not moral to take advantage of all of the techniques we know to make people pay or put money on the games we play, right? All of the loops that we are taught, all of the techniques to create addiction. Even if in my heart it feels wrong, right? It doesn't feel right because this generates problems, right? But when you stop to analyze it, in the end what you're doing is just, you are not forcing anyone to do anything, just creating a system, right? And it's something perfectly legal, and it's just business, it's not personal. But I'm in a huge contradiction. I haven't made a decision yet, actually, and I really like hearing all of you out and hearing that there's more people worried about this aspect of video games. but I think I'm always inclined towards following my feelings in the end and my heart, and I think that I would kind of restrain myself. I think I will take this decision of restraining myself and try not to make such abusive practices, right? Even though we potentially could.
Esa es la cosa de puedes hacerlo.
Yeah, but like,
Legalmente no hay nada deteniéndote.
Pero no
Vale,
es
nos
tema de
apostamos.
legalidad. No es tema
yeah,
de
but
legalidad.
we're there. I think we should be beyond that. If we are not beyond that, who is going to be, right? Uh, a lot of us, I don't know. I am not the only person that complains about the world, right? But we should be complaining is useless. We should be actually taking actions on what's in our hands. I think we should do uh, what we can. And I'm not like don't think that like I'm saying this and people might think like I'm some beneficiary thing. No, I'm all about like people getting what they deserved and fairness, even if it hurts, right? Even if you have to kick someone out of their house, you have to because it's how the system works sometimes. But I don't know. In this aspect, I'm kind of in the soft part, I guess. I don't know.
In
Si
fact,
me permites,
yeah,
Ferran, te voy a robar nada, un minuto que llevamos aquí discutiendo media hora y es presentación tuya.
yes.
Pero déjame nada, medio minuto para contestarle a Lucas. El argumento de el sistema no atrapa a nadie, simplemente el sistema es ahí y la decisión es tuya de si interactas o no, ¿no? Entiendo quizás la perspectiva, pero me parece extremadamente reduccionista. Si quieres...
Justamente he dicho que en una parte siento esto, pero que por el otro lado, no, justamente es que no estoy diciendo que sea así, que te jodas, ¿no? Estoy diciendo que aunque sea así, no creo que sea correcto, que no es la visión correcta, vaya, que si todos tuviéramos esa visión del mundo sería muy jodido.
Exacto, y de hecho, siguiendo con lo que acabas de decir, ¿no? Reforzando esa impresión de, aunque sea solo business, ¿no? Hay que mirarlo desde otra manera. Hay muchas industrias que históricamente se han topado con este mismo problema y la conclusión general acaba siendo la misma, ¿no? Si el sistema tiene inherentemente este tipo de puntos flacos, como mínimo tienes que advertir, ¿no? Que es lo que conocemos todos de los anuncios de bebe responsablemente y si bebas no conduzcas, ¿no? O típico cuando en los paquetes de tabaco, ¿no? De cuidado, fumar produce cáncer. Es como, mira, si realmente, porque un juego bueno te va a enganchar sí o sí. O sea, yo estoy con motores tan bien, me bajé el Hades, la semana que viene tengo exámenes y le he hecho 13 horas y no debería. Pero es como, ¿esto significa que sea pernicioso? No, porque sabía dónde me metía. Pero creo que la distinción clave es esa, ¿sabes? De que ahora mismo muchos gachas de estos es como están hechos con diseño Sith, si se me permite la expresión, y están hechos a mala baba, o sea, para atrapar a la gente y que no se den cuenta. Y eso es, creo, como el mínimo que no podíamos permitir de ninguna manera.
Si me permites ir un paso más allá.
Sí.
No solo diseñado a mala baba, sino jugando con los sentimientos de la persona que está jugando.
Sí, sí, no, correcto. Todo el mismo paquete, sí.
Rafa hizo un artículo, a ver si Alex y yo conseguimos liarlo para que venga a hacer una presentación aquí, analizando el Genshin Impact.
Yes.
Una parte que me gustó muchísimo es cómo Genshin Impact gestiona las transacciones de dinero, comparándolo con otros gachas. Tú cuando en un gacha o en Steam, cuando tienes que comprar cosas, lo mínimo es una ventana de confirmación de
Sí.
te vas a gastar tanto dinero, estás seguro de que
¿Estás de
quieres.
acuerdo? Sí.
Genshin Impact es un clic.
Joder, eso es un
Quiero
next level.
tantas piedras, cuestan tanto. Clicas encima del logo con las piedrecitas y el número de piedras que te van a dar y ya lo tienes.
Hostia, qué fuerte, tío.
Automáticamente. Cuando vas a hacer una tirada, algo tan sutil como puede ser enseñarte las piedras que tienes y las que te van a quedar después de la tirada. Porque
Te ocultan, ¿no? La información de no saber realmente. Sí.
Porque no son. Una tirada de 10 no es un número de. Vale, cada tirada son 1000. No, cada tirada son 1665. Me he inventado el número. ¿Pero me entiendes? Cuesta.
Ya, pero que te cuesta hacerte la idea, ¿no? De manera.
Exacto.
Sí. Bueno, si te parece
¿Quieres
bien.
añadir? Un momento, perdóname, Ferran.
Sí, no, no, perfecto.
Pobre Ferran, tío. El tío quería hablar de Thracia y llevamos media hora aquí hablando de eso.
Son 2
Él no
minutos.
se ha metido en este fregado.
Yep.
Que se lo aguante.
O sea, yo quería decir que el problema con el gambling, por decirlo así, como lo quieras llamar en los videojuegos, no es solo que sea gambling, porque es un poco lo que decía Adri de tenemos publicidad de que fumar está mal. Adri ha jugado 13 horas a Hades, pero él sabe que está mal. El problema de las loot boxes y los sistemas de gacha en general es que estás gamificando la adicción al juego. Porque ya no es un voy al casino, sé que está mal, pero me mola la apuesta, pierdo y me frustro. Es me he gastado 100 euros en el gacha, pero jaja es lo normal. Voy a Reddit, lo comento y dice, jaja, no pasa nada, bro, mira lo que me ha tocado. Después veo a un streamer que se gasta 1000 pavos porque puede, porque los recupera, porque es un creador de contenido. Y ese pavo está legitimizando, perdón, el gastarme 100 euros, porque eso es lo normal, eso es
Sí,
lo que hace este
exacto.
juego divertido. Y eso creo
Exacto.
que es lo peor de todo.
Es la
Igu-
actitud, ¿no? Que se genera de...
Exacto.
Yep.
Igualmente, tú ves los números y el sistema este del FIFA, ¿cómo se llama? El de crear tu equipo, el Ultimate Team, cada año genera más dinero y creo que este año estaba por los 2 billones, por ahí. Y es como,
Sí.
alguien tiene que parar esto.
Ese sistema da para una propia presentación en sí mismo.
Sí.
También,
Ferran,
ya
sí.
como indica... Sí, no, paro. Ferran, por favor, Fire Emblem.
Aprovechando, bueno, yo no he respondido a la pregunta de lo del diseño.
Pobrecito Lucas.
Yeah, wait a moment, because I want to kind of like conclude this thing because there's something I want to go, and then I'm gonna make you answer the question.
Okay.
First of all, I played 2 gachas. Like right now, I've played like 4 gachas, but like played like intensively. I have not
Empieza a
spent.
sonar un violín de fondo.
Please, someone. Like I have spent like 40 euros in like the 6 years I have been playing gacha, so it's not like a lot. And like the money I have spent was semi-justified in a way, but it's still like complete. Like the game is getting to the loot boxes in a way, but like there's something I have been thinking. Like what Lucas commented of, like I'm not sure how I want to like tackle the problem, because of course you have to like live, like you have to eat and you have to do things, and you're working about this, and like we don't have a lot of money, at least I suppose most of us. So like when I don't know if it was last year or when, like I started writing a document of like the things I don't want to do in my video games, and it's something I haven't finished, as most things that I have started, because university is fun. But I think it's an interesting practice to do, at least. But what I kind of wanted to talk more about was this idea I got a day, and that I have to write about, of like, if you think about it, all these Sith, as Adri said, kind of practices of like trying to influence your players to like do what you want and spend money in the loot boxes, etc. It's not so far from what we designers are doing. Like as Adri said, Hades like got him so many hours stuck playing it, even though he had other things to do. What we're doing, like the rule of 3, or like the way that we compose imagery, everything that we humans design to achieve this certain result that we want to do is kind of trying to influence other people to do what we want. And of course, I understand that there's a difference between like what we want as a gacha influencing people wasting money, which is money that is a resource that sustain their lives, and spending 20 minutes or like a certain amount of free time that each person has. But at the end of the day, it's not so different. And the barrier between how this decision will influence the amount of resources, be it time, be it money, that a certain player spends in a game, I think it's also a really interesting topic to discuss, which I don't know if it's the moment to discuss it. And for now, I think we can conclude this topic and finally have Lucas answer the question, because the poor boy has been waiting for a
I'm
while.
actually going to go for a maneuver here, not absolutely ignoring what we have been discussing. So I'm going to go for a maneuver. I don't know if it's gonna work, but I'm gonna try my best. Okay. So you realize that how I don't know if we have been up to 10, 15 minutes discussing about all of this, right? And the same work has come up a lot of times. System, right? You know why? Because it's actually fun not only to use and create and be in systems, but even talk about systems, which we have been doing. So, since we are trying to achieve fun in our games, and the question is, what is a good design? A good design for me is the design that creates a system in which the player is able to use, which the player is able to use, and that has some rules, but that has also a lot of options and a lot of choices, right? It's like a mechanism. A game for me, it's a mechanism. It's a system. It's another of the definitions that we can give a game, right? And we should design focus towards that, because there are games that are not systems. They are games that are basically just a hallway, and you play through it and you feel like you have not used anything. You have been used by the game instead of you using the game, right? And that's the worst feeling that a design can give. So I think we should aim towards building systems. That's my conclusion.
Okay, really interesting, and in a way, somewhat in touch with what we have been talking about. So, pretty cool to hear about it. Now we can finally go back to this, and I talk about what I consider a good video game and good design, and kind of follow up. To begin with, I don't know. I will never know. Okay, I've started writing about it. I have a lot of pages written about it. I have a lot more pages to write about it. I won't reach a conclusive answer, as probably most of us want. But basically, the place where I came from with when I started thinking about actually doing video games, which was not too long ago, because at the beginning I wanted to be a writer. Basically, the idea was that a good writer is that which makes something that has a lot of meaning, right? Something that the reader can, check and feel like they have earned this new knowledge that redefines a part of their lives. So when I went into video games, there was this conception that, like, this is the same as a book or the same as a series, but you just play over it. And it's interesting how at some point I made that jump, and part of why I made that jump was fighting games, actually, which is extremely ironic considering the whole circumstance we have with the previous presentation and everything. Because basically, to me, fighting games were really shallow in terms of the experience they had to offer, because it was just like, well, it's like playing a glorified rock, paper, scissors. But there's no narrative, there's no human element, really. There's just, you're just playing against another guy and just whatever. But with the pass of time, and like as I understood what playing is and how video games are differentiated from other arts, it became more apparent of like how amazing is that you can discover who you are and what are like the way you relate to the world by how you interact in a fighting game. Like, I've discovered things about myself which I kind of had kind of guessed before, but it has given me a lot of insight on like how I am and how I act and how I perceive my relations with others. It's like there's so many layers to what I have discovered about myself just playing Alex in freaking Third Strike. It's like it's a bit bonkers. And basically, kind of what I have moved towards lately is that, and this is going to be the most elitist, asshole-ish kind of thing to say, but video games are art, right? And art is like, you could ask 100 people and you would get 100 different answers. To me, art is that which allows the exploration of human nature, is that which talks about the human experience, about what we live, and it modifies that understanding in a certain way. And like, I could just go on about this so much, I will not. What is good design does, as kind of what we have taught, it's that which serves a purpose. What we have, like what most of you have kind of said is like, good design is that which serves a good video game. I don't completely agree. But if you recall what we talked with Adri about, like, not every game is for everyone. If a game is trying to do something and that decision serves to build upon that something, that's kind of what is a good design. I'm more going towards that position. Basically, an essence. Basically, a video game is an essence that delivers the experience. And as we said, Thracia, like I explained that, like at the long term, the thing that kind of this game is pushing you towards is being a good leader, is taking good decisions. So basically, kind of like what they envisioned is like, okay, we want the player to understand what being a leader in a war is like, and that has a bunch of feelings that we want them to understand or to explore. And well, it's this bunch. I'm not gonna, read them aloud. It's not needed. And thus, we're gonna make a bunch of mechanics, or as Lucas put it, a bunch of systems to kind of reach those emotions. And this you could probably figure out is really related to the MDA or AMD or whatever combination you want to put it. And I don't really, well, I would say I don't really know how they wanted to structure this, but actually in between the last presentation and this one, I found an interview about the creator of Fire Emblem talking about how they wanted to, like, because this is a sequel to Genealogy of the Holy War, they kind of didn't have much to, like, they didn't have freedom with the story, so they wanted to amp up the mechanics and to make the mechanics have the emotional core. So I think that they definitely started with this emotional core and then added all the mechanics, because the fatigue system, the 199 rule, the whole stuff missing, like the stab capping, the weapon importance, the limited economy, like there's so many things that are pushing towards this scarceness and this screwed situation that you have to overcome, and that goes beyond just difficulty for the sake of difficulty. And like when you see at things like reinforcements, which are super abusive in this game, or what I call the Xavier-like things, which is like it's bullshit. Basically, it's that thing that you just look at and it's like, who in their sane mind would have done? Like, why do you have? I'm gonna have a mental breakdown about this, so like, give me 20 seconds. Like, why would you have to like freaking save 8 NPCs from a freaking place from a map to the other one, and then just like have them talk to enemy units, but between enemy units that kill them, to like recruit a unit that's not even good? It's like, what the fuck were they thinking, right? Like when you when you look at that, it's like, that's clearly a flaw, is it not? And I don't really have an answer for it. Like, yes or no, it doesn't matter. The thing is that it has a purpose, and that, therefore, to me, is good design. But I can clearly see why someone would say that it's cheating, because it's literally saying, okay, so anything that Thracia does is good because it's either making you feel good or is you making you feel bad about it. And it's like, well, it's a bit oversimplified. But I hear someone wanting to intervene.
Yeah, I want to intervene.
Bring
Just
it
a tiny bit. Okay, bear with me for a second. So I want to make a question about same turn reinforcements. I know you know what I am talking about. So if you can go back to the slide, please.
Oh, yeah, of course.
Okay, so flaws, it really doesn't matter if it's flawed or not, as long as it has a purpose. Okay. I think there's a point in which certain emotions should never be brought up on a player. For example, I don't think that it's legit to say I have made a decision to make my player feel frustrated or feel bored if it doesn't serve like a higher purpose. I don't know if that makes sense.
Yes, that higher purpose.
Is it? Sorry, I'm gonna intervene as well. Is it justifiable to make your player feel frustrated or bored if they are not playing the game the way that you intend them to play? Like, for example, if you don't move, you're gonna be bored.
No, I think that
No,
intentionality is assumed.
yeah,
Like,
that is like what is gonna happen when you face Xavier-like things is that you're gonna despair. Like, the designers intentionally want you to like stab yourself in the liver repeatedly. Like, it sounds a bit
to which end? what I'm not trying with what I don't comprehend at least yet is to which end do we
Exactly.
want that?
So can you see my mouse?
Yeah, I can. Yeah.
Oh, okay. This is going to be so much easier in this way. So basically, the idea is that if you do something with this to
Yep.
get here, that's a problem. That's not cool. You
Okay.
do something in here to get here. And this is like the middle part.
Oh,
Okay.
I like that.
So despair is kind of a.
It's a
Okay, so
necessity.
despair is an objective. Does that make
Exactly.
sense?
It's
Okay.
needed for you to understand what commanding 40 people in a war that is basically lost to you feels like.
Okay.
And it
I
kind of
can buy that. Yeah, I can buy that. Okay.
Horror movie. It's perfect. It's good.
Para mí eso no sería un defecto.
That's kind of where
Tío, el mejor ejemplo que voy a tener. Spec Ops The Line. Spec Ops The Line, hay un momento que te sientes miserable. Y es en lo que está enfocado el juego completamente. A señalarte y decirte, eres un hijo de puta. Y había partes en las que me quería poner a llorar. No puedo ver análisis y reviews del juego porque me pongo a llorar, porque me siento fatal conmigo mismo. Y necesito estarme una hora sentado en mi cama, en un rincón abrazadito, porque emocionalmente me puede. ¿Eso lo convierte en un mal juego? No. Porque para mí esa experiencia tan brutal es por la que me metí ahí. Aunque no sabía que estaba ahí, creo que es...
Pero es lo que dice Ferran. O sea, flows, yes, no, bueno, no importa, it has a purpose. O sea, que estás diciendo lo mismo, creo, ¿eh?
Sí.
Yeah, yes, in a way we are.
Sí, sí,
Like I have
está
the
apoyando-
perfect meme to answer to what you said, Jose. Perfection. 'Cause it is like it's
Yo-
yes, Lucas.
No, I was cheering.
Ah, okay, great. In a way, it relates to what Adri at some point said, because it's not about the player; it's about the experience, and that's basically this whole thing. Like we've just been freaking wandering 30 minutes to reach what we already have said. It's like, there we go. Like you want to do something, you want to express something, and it that like there's people that's gonna like it or not, but like genius, everything is subjective. Everything people are gonna like it or not. So the way for you to say what is good and what is bad in a world and in a reality in which good and bad just doesn't exist, it's kind of say, okay, so I have an objective, so that's what I want to reach, and you know, I'll try to reach it in the best way possible. And the way you have to measure that is if you are accomplishing the goals that you wanted to obtain or to get in regards to how the player perceives the game. Because at the end of the day, what we're trying to do is just transmit the information in our heads to the information of the player's head. But the problem is that we cannot do that with words because we suck and we couldn't invent a good system to transmit information. So like the best way to do it is through some kind of experience. That's video games. I don't know if there's... Oh, right. Now I put you examples all over the place. I guess we can do that. Sans, we've been talking about him a lot. If you really think about what Sans is... wait, I'm going to spoil Undertale. As like a comment. Is anyone that's like concerned about that? Okay, I guess Jose.
I have played Undertale already.
Okay,
Yeah,
then
me too. I think Alex too, right? That we talked about it sometime. The only one I really don't know it. Pero la jugada, ¿no? Eso sé. ¡Oh, Dios mío!
okay,
Te va a
I
spoiler
can
aquí
keep it
Undertale.
spoiler-free.
No me lo he terminado, me voy a mutear.
No.
enviarme un mensaje cuando tal.
Jose, I just will not spoil it. I'll just be very... yeah, okay, I can be esoteric about this. Basically, Sans is like doing... It's basically slapping you in the face for playing the game as you think it would normally be played. And sure, there's like a lot of things, because Undertale is already thought to be played in a certain way. But like, if you think that you're smarter than the game is going to slap you in the face. And if you think about it, that's like a really bad decision. That's like, it's so unfair. It's just, the player is not prepared, and it supposedly goes against what the player was supposed to do. But if you think about what Undertale is about, and what Sans does within that narrative by doing what he does, is like, that's what makes everyone love him so much. It's because the experience, what Undertale is trying to tell you about that world, and the paper Sans plays in it, it matches so well. And I would like to go in more detail, but spoilers, so screw that. More examples. Celeste. It's a platformer with narrative. I don't think I have to explain why this could look like a bad idea. It's one of the best narrative I've experienced in video games, which are not a lot, but enough, I think, to consider this a really good narrative. And it's because what you're platforming is not just the Yuppie world, is a mountain that means something to Madeline, and that something is like what brings you to the top, and the challenges that you're facing are the challenges of Madeline, not the challenges of the mountain, even though technically you are climbing the mountain, So again, and like, at this point I want to make an interesting clarification. I don't know how much of you have gone to Jean Pon's classes, but basically one of the things that he talked about at some point, because he talks a lot, was that games have these core game pillars, right? They have like these very central ideas, which is similar to my definitions of the essence, but the essence to me is more of like what you want to do with the game, while the game pillars is more like the things that, or like the mechanic things, or like, I don't want to say the mechanical mechanics, but like the tools you give to the player to reach that experience. In a way, it's not exactly that, but and like, if you look at a lot of successful games, kind of what they are doing is, you take a formula, a lot of elements that work well with that formula, and just subvert a certain element, because by subverting it ties to what it's trying to express. It's not a guaranteed way of like doing a good experience. It's not like every single good experience.
Ferran, perdona, tío, pero es que no, tenemos que terminar con esto, bro, porque Alex se tiene que ir y... Alex, espera, ¿te has ido ya? Espera, Ferran. Ya, pero es que no, porque todos nos tenemos que ir a cenar y tal, entonces, yo qué sé, tío, me sabe mal tener que cortar la conclusión así, pero yo qué sé, podemos...
Sigo grabando yo, no pasa nada.
Bueno, vale, más, venga.
Okay, perfect. So yeah, like, it's not like a good game is so simple as you take a game with conventions that are already established and working, and just change one thing to make a narrative. Like, you could technically do it. It's not a guarantee that it will work, but it's but I feel like what you have to do is start with that initial idea, is that creative spark of thinking what I want to communicate to other people. Because if you're just like starting the other way around, may make the message a bit unpolished, because you're trying to adapt over something that's more mechanical, rather than like having that final path. Like, you don't really know where you're going, so it's difficult to kind of judge if decisions are good or bad. Again, this is a bit of like not so specific and outside of this presentation, but I thought it interesting when I was choosing examples of like, well, this is just this kind of game, but they subverted this element. But of course, then I found other games that didn't do this, or didn't necessarily have success because of that. So, just something I wanted to point out. Smaug and Ornstein, basically, it's like a game with really hard bosses. So let's make a really hard boss that's actually two bosses. This seems like something that would kill everyone in the inside and like kill your player base, basically. they are some of the most beloved characters of Dark Souls. So something is working there, I suppose. Monica from Doki Doki Literature Club, whom someone, by the way, put in their tier list as C tier. So basically, this is a dating simulator in which you cannot date the girls. Big brain. Dan Salvato is a freaking genius. I love this game. Danganronpa, right? A game about a murder mystery, kind of, how do you call these games that are really famous now? Like Fortnite. Guys, a bit of help. Battle Arena? Is that what they're called?
No,
Royale.
Battle Royale.
Battle Royale, sí.
That's it. So this is kind of like a battle royale in which a bunch of students kill each other and they have to discover who did it and whatnot. Light spoilers for Danganronpa, I forgot, whatever. And basically there's a subsystem about giving them presents. And you would think like someone is mental here, like something is wrong. But no, because this mystery battle royale thing is actually about knowing these people and understanding that through your bonds you can overcome despair. And it's a bit cheesy, but it's also what it's about. And I love Danganronpa, so that's why it's in here. And this gifting system that allows you to know more of these people, even though it can have some kind of utilitarian kind of implications, you can understand why it's implemented, even though theoretically what it's trying to go for doesn't have anything to do with being friends and happiness and that stuff. And finally, Pokemon. Like, Pokemon is about having cool pets. Who has the coolest pet? So it only makes sense that you can breed your pets and get even cooler pets. So, it makes sense that for an RPG you have a breeding system. Okay, whew, final conclusions, we did it. Gods, I have to go to the bathroom. Anyway, oh yes, the biggest single most important advice I will give you has nothing to do with design, has to do with you. Practice and analyze stuff, please. Like, I was a noob, I knew nothing about video games when I started this career. I liked Pokemon, and now I'm criticizing Pokemon. So you can see that the change has been substantial. The best way to learn things is to analyze what's going on. It's to learn the basics, to know how to construct over those basics, and to practice them, to know what works, what you think will work, because there's a really important part that's like design is not this truth that exists like ethereally everywhere. It's like you in your brain have information. The way that information applies is what matters. So practice things, analyze things, repeat. That's the key. As we said, designing means creating something. It means that you know where you're going. Go towards that essence. Limitations are your friends. If you think you can just put a bunch of things together because they are fun, you're gonna get fucked. Please don't do it. Think with head. What you're doing matters, and it can matter even more if it's well designed. Thank you very much. If anyone has anything else to say, now is the moment. And if not, we can finish this. Adri, go on.
No, antes que nada, un gran aplauso.
No, thank you.
Y ahora sí, comentarios y preguntas. Yo sí que quería hacer un comentario de decir... Normalmente estoy acostumbrado a presentaciones de media o 40 minutos y tal. Y, joder, tiene todo mucho más sentido cuando realmente la gente tiene tiempo para hablar, ¿sabes? O sea, hemos empezado hablando de algo bastante específico, por no decir tremendamente específico. Sistema de combate, un Fire Emblem de hace 8.000 años. Y hemos acabado dando las conclusiones de no solo design, sino proceso creativo en general, ¿no? Conclusiones que, por cierto, me parecen súper buenas, sobre todo la primera, ¿no? De decir, empieza por lo que te gusta a ti, por lo que tú ya sabes, analízalo, ¿no? Si yo empecé entrando aquí desde cero y jugaba a Pokémon y ahora mira lo que te he explicado, pues imagino lo que puedes hacer tú, ¿no? Y por esa parte súper bien. También quería decirte, y con esto ya dejo hablar a los demás, yo me he tragado toda la saga de Thracia, entre comillas. Me he visto la primera presentación, la segunda y ahora esta. Y he podido ver toda la evolución y me gustaría decirte que felicidades, porque las primeras te podía seguir más o menos lo que estabas explicando porque he jugado los títulos y porque sé de lo que hablas y porque juego estrategia y bueno, más o menos te sigo. Esta última has explicado más que las otras y lo has explicado más claro. Así que ha habido una evolución clara y me gustaría felicitarte por ello.
Thanks. First, like, you remember... Vale, bueno, esto te lo explicaré porque...
Vale.
¿Te acuerdas en diseño, en la clase de LASE, cuando hizo la presentación en 20 minutos y terminé con un plan,
Sí.
bueno, coña. Vale. Porque fue en plan, o sea, claro, me dijeron, vale, tienes 20
El
minutos.
infodump.
Y yo, en plan, vale, os voy a tirar aquí toda la mierda. Si hay algo que os interesa, veniros al Discord. Y ahora os lo explico. O sea, que me digas esto que, vale, he entendido qué cojones me estabas diciendo. Es en plan, oh, vale, no me estaba haciendo yo la paja mental. Oh,
Perfecto.
perfecto, a tú. Gracias, muchas gracias, Adri. ¿Alguien más que quiera decir algo?
A mí la verdad es que lo he intentado y me ha costado un poquito seguir. Me ha gustado que estaba estructurada en estos diferentes game loops y tal, pero luego cuando estabas hablando así de cosas de mecánicas bastante específicas, me ha costado un poco seguir a veces. Había mucho texto en algunas slides y tal, y quizás no sé si con algún gráfico o algo, pero igualmente, estaba bien estructurada, pero sinceramente me ha costado seguir. Lo que me ha gustado más de la presentación, por eso, es la segunda mitad. Me han parecido unas conclusiones muy buenas, muy acertadas, y me ha gustado sobre todo este gráfico del final, donde decías todas estas decisiones, todas estas mecánicas, ¿por qué sirven? ¿Sabes? ¿Cuál es la razón y cuál es la conclusión y cuál es el aprendizaje que nos llevamos? Pero sí que es verdad que al principio me ha parecido, yo personalmente creo que había un poquito de información de más, un poquito de ruido, ¿sabes?
Sí.
Esto es
De
lo
hecho,
que yo... Dime,
es que esto nace de una presentación que nos puso el profe de diseño 2 que nos decía, analizad un juego de lucha. Estas no son las presentaciones que me gustan a mí, porque suelen ir mucho a esto, a específico, te voy a explicar cómo se juega a Thracia, y es en plan, ¿y a mí qué me importa? Yo soy diseñador, no jugador de Thracia 776, ¿sabes?
Claro.
Y es en plan, tuve que quedarme un poco ahí. También sé que, o sea, yo no soy capaz de presentar cosas. O sea, yo soy súper antisocial y súper cerrado. Entonces, cuando tengo que explicar cosas fuera de mi cabeza, hago esto. Pongo una imagen en blanco y pongo letras por encima. O sea, ya entiendo que mis presentaciones visualmente pueden ser muy, muy ajetreadas y muy sobresaturadas. También es verdad que muchas cosas de las que saco vienen de eso, de llevo a lo mejor 2 meses analizando lo mismo, dándole vueltas a no sé cuántos temas a la vez, y entonces te tengo que un poco hacer el salto de, vale, esto es el videojuego, esto es 2 meses de mierdas que he estado pensando. Entonces, sí entiendo que es complejo, pero te aseguro, o sea, si te miras las presentaciones anteriores entiendes por qué Adri ha comentado eso, pero sí, soy consciente de que hay mucho que mejorar.
Me imagino y creo que ya voy viendo tu perfil. Creo que por lo que dicen tus compañeros y por lo que dices ahora, más o menos voy encajando tu perfil y bueno, si dice Adri que ha habido una mejora, también lo supongo. Yo no te lo puedo decir porque no he visto las
O
anteriores,
sea,
pero
es
bueno.
lo que te iba a decir, que no hace falta que me creas tampoco. O sea, están en la biblioteca. Si quieres, o sea, tiene que ser 5 minutos, pilla una slide aleatoria, mira la slide y mira lo que está explicando y verás que es que no tiene color, ¿sabes?
Vale, perfecto. Pues muy bien, pues venga, más personas aquí que vamos a darle feedback, ¿no? Hay que conseguir, al final el objetivo no es solo, creo que ya hemos hablado mucho del tema en sí, ahora hay que intentar ayudar a Ferran a que vea los puntos más fuertes de su presentación y cómo se puede mejorar.
Sé que condensar la presentación es imposible, Ferran, pero,
Ya.
a ver, te voy a ser sincero, ¿de acuerdo? La primera presentación que hiciste del Fire Emblem, que esa no estaba, le pregunté, no me acuerdo a quién fue, alguien le preguntó, oye, ¿y qué tal? Y me dijo que había
A mí.
salido, y me dijo que había salido con dolor de cabeza.
Yes.
No sé si fue a ti, a Adri, o sea, le preguntaron a las personas, estoy seguro. Me dijo que salió con dolor de cabeza. Dije, bueno, sino que el tema será denso, pero tal, me cago en Dios, me va a petar el coco. Pero es un problema, porque no se puede. No puedes hacer esta presentación en 1 hora. No es viable.
Ya.
No puedes esperar lo que toca. Ferland, ¿cuánto hemos estado aquí? 2 horas y media. Quizá encontrar la forma de hacer un descanso. Quizá
Esto,
hacer más secciones de os
José.
pregunto una cosa,
sí,
respondedme todos en fila. Cuando has
Sí.
hecho la parte esa de nos has preguntado a todos en fila, ha sido un descanso
Yes.
espectacular.
Sí, sí, sí.
¿vale? Pero
De
estar
hecho, estaba
sentado,
ahí por eso, porque es en plan, voy a saltar de Thracia a lo que tengo yo en la cabeza.
colocado,
Descanso, por favor.
yo lo habría colocado antes incluso.
De esto hablaré yo más, del tema de, sobre todo de la duración y tal, y de... Hablaré yo al final como responsable de las presentaciones, también tengo algo más. O sea, el feedback que te da ahora es simplemente como oyente, pero luego como responsable de las presentaciones en el servidor también tengo alguna cosita que otra que decir. Pero bueno, antes dejo que termine la gente de dar su feedback. Pero va en la línea de lo que comenta aquí. José,
De hecho, es que, claro, esto es complejo porque el game design es complejo. Entonces, un poco la idea sería, yo hago mini presentaciones en plan, vale, o sea, yo tengo, de hecho, porque soy un obsesivo muy loco yo, entonces, yo tengo apuntados en mis esquemas raros la evolución que yo he ido teniendo de en plan, vale, empecé pensando en esta cosa, después me fui a los choices, a los meaningful choices, después me fui a tipos de rewards, no sé qué, y entonces vas viendo un poco cómo hilo cada tema y de hecho, un poco también cómo cada presentación es una evolución de la anterior. En plan, no se hacen tres presentaciones de Thracia 776 repitiendo lo mismo, ¿sabes? O sea, cada una adopta cierto matiz. Entonces, lo ideal sería, claro, que yo hiciera presentaciones explicando esos primeros steps y entonces todos ya sabemos de qué estamos hablando. Hago una presentación de 20 minutos, todo lo pillamos, vamos, nos lo gozamos. Pero como eso